The first thing he saw was the color, a flash of faded pink and blue against the sun-bleached gray of the canyon rock. It didn't belong. Rancher Michael Vance reined his horse in, the animal sensing his sudden stillness. Then he saw the small shape curled in the shadow of a scrub oak. A child. Alone. And when her eyes met his, wide with a terror he could feel in his own chest, she spoke. But the words were in a language he had never heard. She was a little girl, maybe 6 years old, and she was over 100 miles from the nearest border crossing, with no one else in sight. This is the story of Michael Vance, a man who believed his land was just empty desert, and the child he found who spoke a language of pure silence and fear. It's a story about what happens when the world's most dangerous journey ends in your backyard, and the only thing you have to offer is a hand to hold. Michael Vance's world was one of measured silence and brutal pragmatism. His family had ranched 60,000 acres of Sonoran Desert in southern Arizona for 3 generations. The land didn't forgive sentiment. In the summer of 2022, the drought was in its 3rd year. The earth was cracked, the cattle were thirsty, and the heat by 10 a.m. could buckle a steel post. Michael's routine was his religion. Up at 4, check the perimeter fences, monitor the few working wells, look for signs of trespass. Not out of malice, but necessity. His property line brushed against 30 miles of remote federal land, a corridor so harsh and vast it had become a final, deadly gauntlet for people desperate enough to try crossing it on foot. He'd find things: a discarded backpack, empty water bottles, a single worn-out shoe. Sometimes he found more. Over 15 years, he'd called the county sheriff 17 times to report bodies. Men, women, once a teenager, all claimed by the desert's indifferent arithmetic of heat, cold, and distance. He carried extra gallons of water in his truck, leaving them at known migrant trails. A fellow rancher once asked him why he bothered. Michael had just shrugged. "If they come and ask, I'll give them water. That's just my nature." But he never expected them to ask. He expected to find them too late. The morning he found the girl was a Thursday. The forecast called for a high of 112 degrees. He was riding the eastern fence line, a rugged stretch of canyon country where the cell signal died and the only sounds were the wind and the cry of red-tailed hawks. He saw the flash of color. Dismounting, his boots crunching on the gravel, he approached slowly, his voice low. "Hey there. It's okay." She was curled into a fetal position beneath the scant shade of a Apollo verd tree. Her dress was thin cotton, once bright with a floral pattern, now faded and torn. Her skin was coated in a fine layer of dust. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She just watched him, her large dark eyes holding a depth of exhaustion that erased all trace of childhood. He knelt still 10 feet away and held out his canteen. She flinched, pressing herself harder against the tree trunk. He set the canteen on the ground and slid it toward her. She stared at it, then at him, her chest hitching with shallow, panicked breaths. After a full minute, she snatched it, fumbling with the cap before drinking in desperate, choking gulps. Water spilled down her chin, mixing with the dust on her neck. When the canteen was half empty, she clutched it to her chest like a treasure, her eyes never leaving his. "Tu nombre?" Michael asked, his Spanish rudimentary from years working with ranch hands. She just stared. He tried again. "Mama, papa." Her lower lip trembled, but she made no sound. It was then he noticed the signs. The way she held her left arm stiffly. The raw, blistered skin on her feet, her sandals long disintegrated. The quiet, constant tremor in her small hands. This wasn't a child who'd wandered off from a family resting nearby. This was a child who had been walking for days, maybe weeks, alone. He radioed his wife, Alina, back at the ranch house. "I've got a situation on the East Ridge. A child, no adults, I'm bringing her in." There was a long pause on the other end, filled with static. "Border Patrol?" Alina finally asked. "It was the protocol. Find a migrant, you call U.S. Customs and Border Protection. They handle it." Michael looked at the girl. She was shivering now in the rising heat, a sign of severe dehydration. "Not yet," he said. "She needs water and shade first. I'll call from the house." Getting her onto the horse was a delicate operation of mute gestures. He pointed to the saddle, then to her, then mimicked riding. She shook her head violently, backing away. He knelt again, patting his own back, then pointing to her, and offered to carry her. She hesitated, her gaze darting between him, the horse, and the vast, empty canyon behind her. Finally, with a resignation that broke his heart, she gave a tiny nod. He lifted her. She weighed nothing. She was a bundle of bones and feverish heat, and she held herself perfectly rigid in his arms, as if touching him was a necessary violation. The ride back to the ranch house took 40 minutes. She didn't make a sound the entire way. She just leaned against his chest, her head tucked down, her fingers gripping the fabric of his shirt. When the house came into view, a low-slung, sun-bleached adobe structure with a wraparound porch, Alina was already waiting on the steps, a blanket and a glass of water in her hands. Alina, a former ER nurse, took one look at the child and her professional mask snapped into place, though her eyes were soft. Bring her inside, to the guest room. In the cool, dim room, Alina worked with gentle efficiency, checking vitals, cleaning the cuts on the girl's feet, offering sips of an electrolyte solution. The girl endured it all with silent, watchful compliance. She wouldn't change into the clean t-shirt Alina offered until they both turned their backs. When they turned around, she was sitting on the edge of the bed, swimming in the shirt, her dirty dress in a pile on the floor. She looked even smaller. Michael stepped into the kitchen and made the call. The Border Patrol dispatcher was polite, efficient. They would send an agent, but it could be a few hours due to a high-volume event further west. They took his details. Unaccompanied minor, female, approximately 6 years old. Condition, dehydrated, minor abrasions. Location, Vance Ranch. He hung up and stared at the phone. The machinery of the state was now in motion. She would be processed, placed in a holding facility, then likely released to a sponsor. A relative somewhere in the U.S., it was a system that processed over 400 children a day. She was about to become a number. He walked back to the guest room doorway. Alina was sitting on the floor trying to engage the girl with a picture book. The girl was looking at the images, but her body was turned toward the window, toward the desert. She was listening. For what? Michael wondered. For footsteps, for voices calling her name, or for something else. Alina looked up, her expression grim. She won't speak, not Spanish, not anything, but it's more than that. She hasn't made a single vocal sound, not a cry, not a whimper. She lowered her voice. Michael, I've seen this kind of shutdown before, in trauma patients. This is severe psychological shock. Later that afternoon, while Alina tried to get the girl to eat some broth, Michael went back out. A feeling was gnawing at him. He retraced his path to the Palo Verde tree. On his hands and knees, he scoured the area. He found what he was afraid he might find. Not just her footprints, but others. Larger, deeper impressions, spaced far apart as if from someone running. And a few yards away, partially buried in the sand, a black cell phone. The screen was shattered, the battery dead. It wasn't a cheap burner phone. It was a newer model. He bagged it, his mind racing. An unaccompanied 6-year-old didn't carry a smartphone across the desert. Someone else had, and they had been running. He returned to the house as the sun began to dip below the mountains, casting long, sinister shadows across the desert. The Border Patrol agent still hadn't arrived. Alina met him on the porch, her face pale. She finally fell asleep. I was sitting with her. She started trembling in her sleep, and then she said one word, just one, clear as day. Michael felt a chill that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. What did she say? Alina's voice was a whisper. She said, El Lobo. The wolf. Before Michael could process this, the sound of an engine, rough and powerful, cut through the evening quiet. Not the official white and green SUV of Border Patrol. This was a large black pickup truck, tinted windows, roaring up his long gravel driveway. It kicked up a plume of dust that glowed red in the sunset. It came to a stop right in front of the house. 2 men got out. They were dressed in tactical-style pants and boots but wore civilian shirts. One was broad and thick-necked. The other was lean with a cold, scanning gaze. They didn't approach the porch. They just stood by their truck, looking at the house, then at the outbuildings as if taking inventory. The lean one called out, his voice friendly but with an edge that carried across the yard. Evening. We're with a private search and rescue group. We got a report a child might have wandered into this area. You seen anything?" Michael's blood went cold. Private search and rescue. Out here. At this hour, they hadn't identified themselves. They hadn't shown a badge. They were looking for a child, but their eyes were on his windows, his doors. He thought of the shattered phone in his pocket. He thought of the word whispered in a nightmare. El Lobo, the wolf. He stepped to the porch railing, forcing his rancher's drawl to sound casual. "Haven't seen a soul all day, just my cattle." The lean man held his gaze for a beat too long, a faint smile on his lips. "You sure about that? It's a big spread. Easy for a little one to get lost." His partner was now casually walking toward the side of the house, peering toward the windows of the guest room, where a small, sleeping child was hidden. Michael's hand drifted slowly to the back of his belt, where he always carried his pistol when out on the land. He hadn't taken it off. He kept his eyes locked on the man in his driveway. "I'm sure," he said, his voice dropping all pretense of friendliness. "Now I'd appreciate it if you get off my property." The man by the truck stopped walking. The smile vanished. The evening air, already cooling, now felt frozen with a new and very specific danger. These men weren't here to rescue anyone. They were here to reclaim something, and they knew exactly where to look. The standoff in the driveway lasted 10 seconds, but it stretched into an eternity. The lean man's eyes flicked from Michael's face to the hand resting near the small of his back. He understood the message. The friendly pretense evaporated. "Suit yourself," he said, his voice flat. "We'll be in the area if you remember anything." He gave a curt nod to his partner, who stopped his casual inspection of the house and walked back to the truck. They left slowly, not spinning tires, just a deliberate, menacing roll back down the driveway until their taillights disappeared into the twilight. Michael didn't move until the sound of the engine faded completely. He rushed inside, locking the door behind him. Alina was at the window, her face ashen. "Who were they?" she breathed. "They said search and rescue." "They were lying," Michael said, pulling the shattered phone from his pocket. "I found this where I found her. Someone was with her. Someone running." Alina took the phone, turning it over in her hands. "Michael, if she's not just lost, if someone is looking for her, like asterisk that." He went to the guest room. The little girl was awake, sitting bolt upright in bed, the blanket clutched to her chin. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, fixed on the door. She had heard the truck. She had heard the voices. She knew. Michael sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to touch her. He pointed to himself. "Michael." He then pointed to her, a question on his face. She stared. Then slowly she raised her hand and touched her own chest. She didn't speak, but her lips moved silently, forming a word. Then she did something remarkable. She held up her small hand, fingers spread. Then she folded down her thumb. 4 fingers. She pointed to herself again. Then she held up 1 finger. She repeated the sequence, 4, then 1. 4-1, Michael whispered. She nodded just once. It wasn't a name, it was a number. 41. Was that her age? No. An identifier, a tally, a designation. A cold understanding began to dawn. The high-end phone. The men who weren't authorities. The child who communicates in numbers and terrified silence. This wasn't a simple case of a family getting separated in the desert. He thought of the statistics he'd read but never wanted to believe, about the shadow economy that preyed on the desperate. The Global Slavery Index estimated over 400,000 people trapped in slavery within the United States itself. Children were commodities. A pretty young girl could be sold for $80,000 or more to the right buyer. She wasn't a migrant. She was cargo that had escaped. He called the Border Patrol again, the same dispatcher. "The agents you're sending, I need to know their names and badge numbers, and I need them now. There are hostile individuals on my property asking about the child." The dispatcher's tone changed, becoming more urgent. "Sir, are you in immediate danger?" "I don't know," Michael said, watching the darkening windows. "But the child might be." An hour later, 2 Border Patrol agents finally arrived in their marked vehicle. A man and a woman, both looking tired but alert. Michael met them outside, relaying everything. The discovery, the girl's condition, the 2 men. The female agent, Agent Reyes, listened intently. "Can we see her?" she asked. Inside, the girl took one look at the green uniforms and scrambled backward on the bed, pressing herself into the corner. a low, animal-like whimper finally escaping her throat. It was the first sound of pure terror she'd made. Alina stepped in front of the agents. "That's enough, you're scaring her." Agent Reyes softened her stance. "We're not here to scare anyone. We need to establish her identity and well-being." But the damage was done. The girl had shut down completely, her face buried in her knees. In the kitchen, the agents explained the process. As an unaccompanied minor, she would be taken to a designated facility for processing, a sterile, secure holding center, medical checks, interviews through a translator. Then, if a sponsor, a family member, could be located and vetted, she'd be released to them. The entire system was overwhelmed, processing over 400 kids a day. "It's the best we can do," the male agent said, not unkindly. Michael thought of the girl's silent communication, her number identifier, the predatory men in the black truck. The system would chew her up and spit her out into a pipeline that her pursuers clearly knew how to navigate. Sponsorship could be coerced. Families could be threatened. Once she was in the bureaucratic machine, she could vanish for good. He made a decision. "She's not ready to be moved. She's in severe psychological shock. My wife is a former trauma nurse. She needs stability, not a detention cell." Agent Reyes gave him a long look. "Mr. Vance, I understand your compassion, but this is the law. We have to take her." "What if she's not just an undocumented minor?" Michael said, his voice low. "What if she's a victim of something else? Trafficking. Those men weren't family. They were hunters." The two agents exchanged a glance. Human trafficking investigations were a different, complex beast, often crossing into Homeland Security jurisdiction. It changed the calculus. "Do you have any proof?" Agent Reyes asked. Michael handed her the broken phone. "This is proof someone with resources was with her, and she communicates like someone who's been programmed. She gave me a number, 41. That got their attention. Agent Reyes bagged the phone. "We'll need to take this, and we'll need to report the incident with the individuals in the truck. But sir, we still have to take the child. Protocol is protocol. We can request a trauma-informed caseworker." It was Alina who found the compromise, her nurse's authority cutting through the procedural standoff. "Look at her," she said, pointing to the room where the girl sat frozen. "Forcing her into a vehicle tonight could cause permanent psychological harm. You have our information. The ranch is isolated. She's not a flight risk. Request an emergency humanitarian parole for 24 hours. Let us stabilize her. You can post an agent here if you need to, but don't put her in a van tonight." After a hushed conversation outside, the agents agreed. One condition: an agent would remain stationed at the ranch overnight for safety and observation. Michael knew it was as much to ensure they didn't flee with the girl as it was for protection. The male agent, Agent Cooper, volunteered to stay. The black SUV was parked prominently in front of the house, a deterrent to anyone watching. The night passed in a tense, quiet vigil. Agent Cooper sat in the living room. Michael and Alina took turns sitting in a chair in the girl's doorway. She didn't sleep, she just watched the window. Sometime after midnight, Michael, exhausted, was at his turn. He saw her small shape shift in the bed. She sat up, looking at him. Then she slowly patted the empty space on the mattress beside her. Not a demand, an invitation, a test. He moved from the chair to sit on the very edge of the bed, his back to her, giving her space. For several minutes, nothing. Then he felt the slightest pressure against his back. She had leaned forward just enough so her forehead rested between his shoulder blades, a point of contact, a silent signal of fragile, terrifying trust. He didn't move. He just sat there, becoming a wall between her and the dark window, and felt the weight of that small, trusting forehead like the heaviest responsibility he had ever known. At first light, everything changed. The phone call came to Agent Cooper. He took it outside, his expression growing grim. He came back in and looked at Michael. "The phone," he said. "Our techs managed to pull data from the motherboard. It was registered to a woman named Isabella Mendez, reported missing from Phoenix 6 weeks ago. She was a legal resident, but that's not the main thing." He paused. "The last location data before it died shows it moving from a known stash house in Sonora, Mexico, to a coordinate 10 miles south of your property line. And the device had a secondary tracking app installed, one that's still pinging its last known location, which is here. The meaning was clear. The men in the truck hadn't just been guessing. They had followed the signal of this phone to his doorstep, and if they had access to that technology, they likely knew the Border Patrol was here too. They were watching. They were waiting for the system to move the girl to create a moment of vulnerability. "We have to get her out of here," Agent Cooper said. "Now we're too exposed. We'll transport her to a secure federal facility in Tucson. It's the only way." A plan was hastily formed. A second Border Patrol vehicle, an unmarked one, would be sent as a decoy to draw attention. Meanwhile, Agent Cooper would take the girl in his marked SUV, but go the opposite direction, using back roads to reach the highway. As they prepared to leave, Alina dressed the girl in clean clothes, a pair of shorts and a t-shirt that swam on her. The girl was passively compliant, but her eyes were fixed on Michael. When it was time, Agent Cooper went to pick her up. She stiffened, then did something unexpected. She reached out not for Alina, but for Michael's hand. Her small fingers wrapped around two of his, holding on with surprising strength. She was asking him, in the only way she could, not to let go. Michael looked at Agent Cooper, then at the terrified child anchoring herself to him. The law said one thing. Every instinct in his body screamed another. "I'm riding with you," he stated. "It wasn't a request. She'll panic if I'm not there. You need me to keep her calm." After a brief, tense negotiation, Cooper agreed. Michael would ride in the back with the girl. Alina would follow in their truck later. They moved quickly. The decoy vehicle arrived and left with a show of haste, heading west. 5 minutes later, Michael climbed into the back seat of the SUV, the girl on his lap, her face buried against him. Agent Cooper got behind the wheel. "Seat belts," he said, and pulled out, turning east onto the rough ranch road that led toward a remote county highway. For the first 20 minutes it was quiet. The girl's trembling gradually subsided. Then, as they bumped onto the asphalt of the lonely two-lane highway, Cooper's radio crackled. It was the decoy unit. "We've got a tail, black pickup matching the description, 2 occupants. They're following at a distance but making no attempt to intercept. Over." A chill ran down Michael's spine. The hunters weren't fooled. They were letting the decoy go, which meant they knew the real target was elsewhere. But how? Cooper pressed the accelerator. The SUV surged forward. They were still 50 miles from Tucson, a stretch of empty desert road. Michael held the girl tighter. He looked out the back window. At first, he saw nothing. Then on the long, straight horizon behind them, a distant plume of dust appeared, growing steadily larger. Not one, 2 plumes, 2 vehicles moving fast, closing the distance. They hadn't been fooled at all. They had been waiting, and now they were coming. And they were between the ranch and safety. Agent Cooper's voice was calm, but his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "They're gaining." He radioed for backup, giving their location and situation. A priority one: officer in danger, minor in custody. The response was grim. The nearest units were 30 minutes out. They were on their own in a stretch of desert known as the Sand Tank Valley, a vast, roadless basin. The 2 dust plumes resolved into distinct shapes: the black pickup from the ranch and a second vehicle, a dark SUV. The girl in Michael's lap had gone preternaturally still, her breathing shallow. She wasn't looking at the pursuing vehicles. She was staring at Michael's face, as if memorizing it. He held her gaze, trying to project a calm he didn't feel. "It's gonna be okay," he murmured, a useless promise. Cooper pushed the SUV to its limits, the engine whining. But the road was straight, and the trucks behind were built for power, not bureaucracy. The distance closed. The lead pickup pulled into the oncoming lane, accelerating until it was alongside them. Michael could see the lean man in the passenger seat, his face expressionless. Then the pickup swerved, its heavy-duty bumper crunching into the side of the Border Patrol SUV. The impact was violent. The girl screamed, a raw, shattered sound, as the SUV shuddered and veered onto the gravel shoulder. Cooper fought the wheel, but the second vehicle, the SUV, pulled ahead and cut sharply in front of them. Brake lights flared. Cooper had a split second: hit the vehicle head-on or leave the road. He yanked the wheel hard right. They plunged off the asphalt down a shallow arroyo and into the open desert. The suspension bucked violently as they hit rocks and scrub. "Hold on," Cooper shouted, wrestling the vehicle through a landscape it was never meant for. The two pursuers followed without hesitation, their off-road capabilities superior. It was no longer a chase. It was a hunt. Cooper's radio was a chaos of static and fragmented updates. Backup was still 20 minutes out. The traffickers' vehicles fanned out, trying to flank them. A shot rang out, not at them but into the air. A warning. The next might not be. Michael saw it first. Ahead, the land dropped away into a deeper, narrower wash, a natural dead end. "Cooper, left, go left." Cooper spun the wheel, but the wash was too wide to jump. They skidded sideways, coming to a stop with the driver's side against a steep 6-foot dirt bank. They were trapped. The two pursuing vehicles slid to a halt, blocking the open end of the wash 30 yards away. 4 men got out. They didn't rush. They walked forward with the deliberate confidence of predators who have cornered their prey. Cooper drew his service weapon. "Stay in the vehicle, lock the doors." His voice was iron. He got out, using the door as a shield, his weapon trained on the approaching men. "United States Border Patrol, stop and show me your hands." The lean man, who seemed to be in charge, didn't even break stride. He held up his empty hands in a mocking gesture of peace. "We don't want a problem with the law, Agent. We just want what's ours. The girl. You hand her over, we all walk away. No one else gets hurt." "She's in federal custody," Cooper stated. "Step back now." The man smiled, a thin, cruel thing. "Federal custody, right. And in a few hours she'll be in a system so backed up, so paper-clogged, that a phone call from the right lawyer will have her released to a family member before sunset. We can wait, or we can take her now and save everyone the paperwork." He took another step forward. "But here's the thing. If we have to take her now, it gets messy. And you, Agent, you become a casualty of a tragic desert accident." Inside the SUV, Michael clutched the girl. Her entire body was rigid with terror. He looked at the standoff, at Cooper's solitary figure against 4 armed men. The math was hopeless. He made a decision. He leaned close to the girl's ear. "Listen to me. Number 41, I need you to be brave one more time." He pointed to the steep bank on his side of the vehicle, then to her, then made a climbing motion. He then pointed to a dense thicket of mesquite 50 yards away across open ground. He mouthed the word, "Hide asterisk." Understanding flickered in her eyes, cutting through the fear. She gave a tiny, sharp nod. Michael quietly popped the door lock on his side. He waited for the moment. It came when one of the traffickers, impatient, shifted his weight, drawing Cooper's aim for a fraction of a second. "Now," Michael whispered. He shoved the door open and the girl scrambled out, a small dart of motion, and clawed her way up the dirt bank with surprising speed, disappearing over the top. "Hey," one of the traffickers yelled, raising his weapon. But Michael was already out, standing in the open, his hands raised. "She's gone. You want to waste time shooting us, or you want to find her before she vanishes for good?" He shouted it, drawing all their attention to him. The lean man's composure cracked. Rage flashed across his face. He snarled an order. 2 of his men immediately broke off, scrambling up the bank after the girl. The leader and the 4th man kept their guns on Cooper and Michael. For 2 agonizing minutes they stood in the stifling desert silence. Then a shout from over the ridge. "She's fast, heading east." The leader glared at Michael with pure venom. "This changes nothing. We'll find her. And you just signed your death warrant." He and his remaining man began backing toward their vehicles, covering their retreat. In seconds they were gone, roaring out of the wash to coordinate the search from the high ground. Cooper immediately holstered his weapon and ran to Michael. "What were you thinking? She's out there alone." "She's smarter than they are," Michael said, his heart hammering. "And she's not alone. I know this land. You go that way, work around the north side of that ridge. I'll cut east. We'll flank them." It was a rancher's strategy, not a federal agent. Cooper hesitated, then nodded. They split up. Michael moved with the ingrained knowledge of a lifetime on this soil. He didn't chase. He anticipated. He thought like a scared child who knew she was being hunted. He headed for the one place on this stretch of desert that offered true concealment, an ancient, collapsed lava tube, its entrance hidden by a thatch of creosote bush. He'd shown it to his own kids years ago as a secret fort. As he neared it, he saw signs, a freshly broken branch, a tiny scuff in the soft sand. He approached the crevice and whispered, "Currenta y uno, it's Michael." For a long moment, nothing. Then a small hand emerged from the darkness, followed by her face, streaked with dirt and tears. He pulled her out and she collapsed against him, her small body shuddering with silent sobs. He didn't have time to comfort her. The sound of an engine growled nearby. They were running out of time. He had to get her to a new hiding place, a spot even he hadn't thought of yet. And then he saw it, the rusted, skeletal remains of an old windmill pump, its tank half buried in the sand. The concrete cistern beneath it was dry, its heavy metal lid slightly ajar. It was a tomb or a sanctuary. He pried the lid open just enough. "Inside, quick, don't make a sound, no matter what you hear." She looked at the dark hole, then at him, her trust absolute. She climbed down into the dry, dusty space. He closed the lid most of the way, leaving a crack for air and scattered debris over it. Minutes later, the two traffickers stumbled into the clearing, panting. They saw Michael standing by the lava tube. "Where is she?" one demanded, raising a pistol. "Gone," Michael said, spreading his hands. "You lost her." The man's face twisted. He stepped forward, pistol-whipping Michael across the temple. Michael went down, vision swimming. Through a haze, he saw the man raise the gun again, but a shout stopped him. It was the leader arriving with the fourth man. "Enough, he's no use to us dead. The girl can't have gone far. Fan out. Check every hole, every bush, she's here." As they began their search, Michael, lying on the ground, heard something over the ringing in his ears. A faint, rhythmic thumping in the distance. Not an engine. Helicopter rotors. Backup was arriving, but too late to prevent what happened next. One of the men, kicking at the creosote near the cistern, stubbed his toe on the metal lid. "Hey, what's this?" He bent to clear the debris. Michael's blood turned to ice. He tried to stand, but a boot pressed down on his chest. The man pried the lid all the way open. A beam of sunlight fell into the darkness, illuminating the girl curled at the bottom, her hands over her head. "Well, look what we have here," the leader said, a vicious smile spreading across his face. He reached down to grab her. And that's when the world exploded in noise and light. The thunder of the helicopter was directly overhead. A voice, amplified and authoritative, boomed across the desert. "This is the Department of Homeland Security. Drop your weapons and put your hands on your heads. Now." But the leader, in a final, desperate move, didn't drop his weapon. He jumped into the cistern, grabbing the girl and yanking her up, using her as a human shield, a pistol pressed to her temple. "Back off," he screamed at the sky, "or she dies right here." Michael, from the ground, watched in horror as the standoff crystallized. Federal agents in tactical gear were fast-roping from the helicopter. Cooper was shouting directions, but the trafficker had won. He had the prize, and he was cornered, desperate and utterly ruthless. The girl, held tight against the man's chest, looked over his arm. Not at the agents, not at the helicopter. She looked at Michael, and in her eyes he didn't see terror anymore. He saw a deep, profound sadness. And then she did something that would haunt him forever. She slowly raised her hand, not in surrender, but with her fingers extended. 4 fingers, then 1, 41. She pointed that hand not at her captor, but at the horizon to the south, toward the border. Then she closed her eyes, as if accepting her fate. In that moment, Michael understood. The number wasn't just an identifier, it was a count. She wasn't number 41 in a sequence. She was the 41st child, and she was pointing to where the others might be. This wasn't just about saving one girl, it was about a pipeline, and she had just given him the only clue that could break it wide open. But to follow it, he first had to watch her be taken away at gunpoint, with the full might of the federal government powerless to stop it. Time stopped in the desert wash. The trafficker, his back against the concrete cistern, held the girl like a piece of armor. The Homeland Security tactical team had him surrounded, but one twitch of his finger and it would all be over. Michael, held back by Agent Cooper, could only watch. The girl's final gesture, 4 fingers, one finger pointing south, burned into his mind. Then the girl moved, not to struggle. She slowly, deliberately turned her head just enough to look the trafficker in the eye, and she spoke. Her voice was a dry, rasping whisper, the first real words anyone had heard from her. They were in Spanish, clear and chilling. El lobo tiene hambre. The wolf is hungry. The man flinched, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was enough. A single, precise shot rang out from a sniper position on the ridge. The trafficker crumpled, his weapon clattering to the ground. The girl dropped, but was instantly scooped up by a tactical agent who shielded her with his body as the team surged forward, securing the other traffickers who froze in surrender. In the chaotic minutes that followed, the girl was rushed to a waiting helicopter, headed for a specialized pediatric trauma unit in Tucson. Michael gave his statement again and again to Homeland Security investigators, to FBI agents who now swarmed the scene. He told them about the number, about her gesture to the south. He handed over the broken phone. The investigation was no longer about one lost child. It was a flagship case, dubbed Operation 41. Back at the ranch that night, the silence was heavy. Alina held him, both of them too exhausted for words. The news filtered in over the next 48 hours. The 4 captured men were low-level operatives, but their phones and GPS data were a treasure trove. The lean man, whose name was Draven, was a mid-level coordinator for a transnational trafficking ring that used remote desert crossings to move high-value assets, children, from Central America to a network of stash houses in Phoenix and Las Vegas. The girl, they learned, was not from Mexico. She was from a small village in Guatemala. Her name was Lupita. She had been taken from a market 8 months prior. But the real breakthrough came from Lupita herself. After 3 days in the hospital, stabilized and working with a trauma therapist who specialized in nonverbal children, she began to communicate through drawings. She drew a map, not of her village, but of a complex in the desert, a cluster of trailers, a water tank, a distinctive rock formation shaped like an eagle's head. She drew other children, each with a number on their shirt: 40, 39, 38. She drew the wolf, a man with a snake tattoo on his neck. Investigators cross-referenced her drawings with satellite imagery. They found the complex. It was a transfer point just 10 miles inside the Arizona border. A multi-agency raid hit the complex a week later. They found it empty, but forensics found everything. DNA from over 24 different children, ledgers written in code detailing transactions, and most damningly, a digital roster on a hidden laptop. It was a list, girls and boys by number with coded notations about their sale status. Lupita was listed as 41 asset in transit Phoenix buyers, auction pending. The ledger showed she was to be sold in a private, online auction to a buyer in Europe. Her starting bid was $90,000. The investigation unraveled the network. Arrests were made in Phoenix, in Nogales, in Las Vegas. The snake-tattooed wolf was identified as a corrupt former police officer from Sonora, now in custody in Mexico. The news cycles raged for weeks, a story of high-tech slave trading in the American desert. Michael and Alina gave no interviews. Their part was done. But for Michael, it wasn't done. The ranch felt empty. The silence of the desert now felt like a presence, one that whispered about the 17 bodies he'd found over the years, and the one living soul he'd managed to pull back from the edge. He couldn't stop thinking about her drawing, about the other numbers on that list. Where were they? A month after the raid, a black SUV came up the driveway again. This time it was Agent Reyes and a woman in a suit, Dr. Alicia Vance from the Department of Health and Human Services. They sat at the kitchen table. Lupita was in foster care in Tucson, they explained. She was safe, receiving intense therapy, but she was not thriving. She had withdrawn again, refusing to eat, refusing to draw. Her foster parents were kind but overwhelmed. The therapist believed the root of her regression was a shattered sense of safety. The one constant in her trauma, the one person her mind had latched onto as a protector, was the man who found her in the canyon. You, Michael. Dr. Vance leaned forward. We have a highly unorthodox request. We'd like to arrange a visit, a supervised therapeutic visit. She needs to see that you are real, that the safety you represented wasn't an illusion. It could be pivotal to her recovery. Michael looked at Alina. Alina's eyes were already shining. She nodded. Of course, Michael said, his throat tight. The visit was arranged at a neutral, child-friendly facility in Tucson. When Michael walked into the bright playroom, Lupita was sitting in a corner, clutching a stuffed horse. She looked up. For a long moment, nothing. Then she slowly stood. She walked across the room, stopping a few feet away. She didn't hug him. She didn't smile. She simply reached out and took his hand, holding it in both of hers, examining it as if verifying its reality. Then she looked up at his face and gave a single, slow nod. The connection was reestablished. It was enough. That single visit turned into weekly visits. Then, with the staggering bureaucracy of the state slowly bending to the recommendations of therapists and caseworkers, it turned into weekend stays at the ranch. Lupita would arrive on Friday afternoon, quiet and watchful. By Sunday evening, there would be a faint light in her eyes. She followed Michael everywhere, a small, silent shadow. She learned to feed the horses, not with words, but by mimicking his movements. She would sit with Alina in the garden, content to feel the sun and the soil. The legal process was a mountain. Her family in Guatemala was located, a grandmother who was too old and frail to care for her, an aunt with 6 children of her own in a one-room house. Reunification was not a safe option. Her status as a material witness in a major federal case granted her certain protections. After 9 months, with the full support of her court-appointed advocate, her therapist, and the federal agents who had worked the case, the judge approved a long-term placement. With Michael and Alina Vance, the adoption became final on a bright Tuesday morning in a Tucson courtroom. Lupita wore a new dress, the color of the desert sky. When the judge pronounced the decree, she didn't cheer. She turned to Michael and Alina, took their hands and placed them together, one on top of the other. Then she placed her own small hand on top of the pile, a silent pyramid of belonging. Life on the ranch changed. It was no longer just a fortress against the desert's harshness. It became a sanctuary for healing. Lupita started school with a dedicated aide to help bridge the language and trauma gap. She began to speak in short, careful sentences, first in Spanish, then slowly in English. But her primary language remained the one they had built together, a language of gestures, of shared looks, of leaning a head against a shoulder during a scary movie. And she never forgot the others. In her room, she kept her drawing of the children with numbers. One afternoon, 2 years after her adoption, Michael found her looking at it. She pointed to the numbers, then to a world map on the wall. She pointed to Guatemala, then to the United States, then to Europe. She looked at Michael, her question clear in her eyes. Did we stop the wolf? He told her the truth. They had stopped that one wolf. Many of the men from the ledger were in prison. Dozens of children had been identified and rescued because of the case she helped break. But the pipeline, the hunger, still existed in other forms. It was a fight that would never truly be over. Lupita listened, then took a new piece of paper. She didn't draw children with numbers. She drew a rancher, a nurse, and a little girl standing together on a porch looking out at the desert. And above them she drew a big, sprawling tree, its roots deep in the ground. She handed it to Michael. It was her answer. Safety wasn't the absence of wolves. Safety was the strength of the tree you planted together. The story of Michael Vance and the child he found in the canyon didn't end with a dramatic shootout or a courtroom verdict. It ended, as the best stories do, in the quiet, stubborn act of building a new life. It's a story written not in words, but in the language of morning chores done side by side, of homework at the kitchen table, of a hand held during a thunderstorm. It's a story that proves that sometimes the most powerful translation isn't between languages, but between one wounded heart and another. And that in the vast, silent desert, the smallest act of kindness can grow roots deep enough to hold the world at bay. So what do we do with a story like this? We can file it away as a remarkable exception, a heartwarming anomaly in a world of headlines that numb us with their scale. But the truth is, the story of Michael, Alina, and Lupita is not an exception. It is a single, visible point on a vast and hidden map. Remember the number. Not just 41, but the 152,000. That's how many unaccompanied children were encountered at the border in a single recent year. Each one is a story. Each one carries a universe of fear, hope, and silent language within them. The systems built to manage this crisis, the shelters, the courts, the paperwork, are overwhelmed by the volume. They are designed for processing, not for seeing. What Michael Vance did that day in the canyon wasn't heroic in the grand, cinematic sense. It was human. He saw, he stopped, he knelt. And in that simple act of witnessing, he altered the entire trajectory of a life, and in doing so, exposed a pipeline of predators who depended on the anonymous, the unseen, the easily forgotten. This is the uncomfortable, vital tension at the heart of such stories. The bond that forms in the quiet, against all odds, is real and powerful, but it exists within a framework of staggering systemic failure. The wolves operate in the gaps of that system, in the shadows between jurisdictions, in the despair that drives parents to send their children on a journey where 31% of women will be sexually assaulted. The solution is not just more law enforcement or open borders. It's a harder thing. It's building a society that sees people before it sees problems, that recognizes the language of trauma before it demands paperwork. Lupita's drawing of the tree with deep roots is more than a child's art. It's a blueprint. Safety isn't a wall. It's not a policy paper. It's the network of connection, the willingness to be the one who stays. It's the rancher who leaves water in the desert. It's the nurse who recognizes shock. It's the teacher who sees anxiety behind a language barrier. It's the ordinary, stubborn decision to not look away. For every child like Lupita who finds a safe harbor, how many others become permanent ghosts in the ledger, a number with no story? We will never know. But the lesson of this story isn't about fixing everything. It's about the power of the specific. You may never find a child in the desert, but you will have chances to see the person who is invisible, to hear the story that isn't being spoken, to offer the hand that says, I am here and you are real. In a world that thrives on noise, the most radical act is often quiet attention. It is the first and most vital translation. It is how we begin to rebuild the roots that hold us all. If stories that explore the depth of human connection against impossible odds matter to you, consider subscribing. Your attention is the first step in making the unseen seen.